I'll look for the recording. There we go. All right, good evening and welcome to the Crystal and Pentagon Cities Council meeting of June 26, 2024. The overall mission of the CPCC is to provide with staff support, periodic monitoring, evaluation, and identification of emerging issues and potential solutions in all dimensions of implementing the Crystal City Sector Plan and Pentagon City Sector Plan to assure achievement of the plan's goals and objectives over the life of the plans. We've got a quorum tonight. Our quorum is 9 people, and we are over 9 people. So I think we're in good shape. We're holding this virtual meeting in accordance with the CPCC e-meeting policy adopted April 13th, 2023. Okay, so welcome everybody. Our agenda this evening is going to cover a couple of topics. We'll have a development update. We'll look at the not the approved CIP budget, but the proposed CIP budget and see if there's any issues we want to follow up on. We'll talk about we'll have a couple of presentations, one on the DES parking study, another presentation on the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative, and then the folks from APA will go over the next minor site plan amendment for the Crystal Houses area site plan, specifically the Fern Street townhouses. Okay. All right, Matt, do you want to hit the development update?
Yeah, let me share my screen real quick. Give me 1 second. I think everybody should be able to see this one. So again, similar format as past meetings. Just wanted to provide a timely update on where we are. So kind of shifting ahead, you're all familiar with the different site plan categories and how we try to track their various stages. Right now, we are primarily focusing on the active site plans. So you can see here kind of the usual summary of what has been approved and is behind us. Various stages of construction or simply awaiting future construction. But the ones I wanted to focus on are really here in blue, which are the 5 active site plans that we're tracking across the area. You may have participated in a few recent meetings with the Site Plan Review Committee or even the Long Range Planning Committee. But I did want to go one by one and just give you a sense of what to anticipate, particularly in the few that I think maybe have not had any engagement recently, and there might be some curiosity about that. So specifically with River House, we are awaiting and reviewing a major resubmission since really winter timeframe. This not only addresses a lot of the LRPC feedback from that last year, but also a lot of staff comments. So drawings are beginning to come in, but it's a substantial submission and a lot of review time is required before we can take the next step of initiating the online engagement effort. So we anticipate late summer, we might be in a position to offer some dates and let everyone know what to expect. The other one I wanted to highlight involves the Pentagon Center phase development site plan. That one is scheduled to be on the agenda for July with the Planning Commission and County Board. The 2525 Crystal Drive, that was actually supposed to have a SPRC meeting on July 1. I just received note that that might have to be postponed. So we may have further updates if that's still going to happen in July or if it needs to wait until September. But that is basically at the stage where the SPRC needs to conclude its review before we can move on to the public hearings in the fall. The Brookfield property, 12th Street Landing, that phase development site plan has been moved to September. So we are awaiting the deadlines that are approaching with those hearings, but don't need to anticipate any further meetings on that one until the Planning Commission. And then finally, Crystal Plaza Apartments, and yet another update to the Crystal City Block M. That actually took place earlier this week with the LRPC, and we are now looking at potential SPRC dates, and working with the applicant, who's actually here tonight, to see when it might make the most sense to initiate the online engagement. The last thing I'll mention, since it's not on this screen, is that we are still on track to readopt all of the Pentagon City applications. So the sector plan, its zoning amendments, and the updates to the GLUP and master transportation plan. Those should all be on the agenda for July with the Planning Commission and County Board. So look forward to reaching that milestone and reliving it all again. But with that, I can pause and take any questions if you guys have any.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. What do you think the net impact of the having to readopt the plan is going to be for everybody? Is it an outright schedule slip? Is it costing somebody money somewhere, or are we all able to just roll with it?
I think it's the latter, and the only shift I think we've noticed was really with the 12th Street Landing phase development site plan that was, I believe, targeting July, and I think just to keep things a little bit clean and safer, we moved it to September. But as far as I can tell, it's not really causing a major delay in the overall development, since we're only looking at the PDSP with that one.
Okay.
I think all the other applications you see here have been progressing at their natural pace and not really impacted by the sector plan update.
Okay, great. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Okay, all right, great. Thanks, Matt. Anything else on this? All right, let's pick up the next one, which will be the CIP, and I will share my screen, which I think I've done here. Okay, so right now there's the county manager has proposed a update to the CIP, and I did a quick analysis just to see where we were on this. So what I've done is I've identified all the Crystal City, Pentagon City related stuff, and I is fairly quick, so I might have missed something, but there's been some shifts in the numbers on the left side. The big one is the Virginia Highlands Park master plan, and which what it appears has happened is the money has shifted to the right, and so it was going to total about $27 million, and right now only about 1.5 million is still in the plan in 2034, and that was originally had the full plan and what appeared to be the construction as well in the 28 to 32 time period. Let's come back to that. Crystal City Library is now in here as a with funding in the 28 to 30 time frame. The Army Navy Country Club Trail, that's now called the Arlington View Trail Connector, and the budget's increased to $10 million from about $5 million. The Crystal City Metro East entrance and the Crystal City, Pentagon City, Potomac Yard streets are in here. That the east entrance has gone up, has had about 30 million or 35 million added to it. And the streets is down by about 10 million. Matt, I don't know if you have any comments on those. Pick that up in a minute. The elevators there, the transitways there. Oh, and I meant to remove this. When I originally did this, I couldn't find the Country Club Trail because it changed names. So anyway, it looks like the big issue for us may be the Virginia Highlands Park. But I wanted to open it up to discussion, see if anybody had noticed anything else that was of concern. And Matt, I wondered if, did you have any narrative? I know we talked a couple minutes ago. Do you have a narrative on this, or is there a place where we might be able to discover what the plan is for, or the rationale behind some of these shifts?
Yeah, some of them are just simply, unfortunate. I do think, if you can even call it silver lining, with Virginia Highlands Park, what I'm seeing is the same funding level that was previously allocated for the initial planning stage, but simply shifted further out to the outer years of this current CIP. So presumably, if we were going out another 2 years, I would imagine the same numbers would start to show up, but it is a delay nonetheless. I am running down a few questions of my own with park staff and leadership, and I think what could happen is I can kind of update them on some of the things we hear tonight and kind of use that opportunity to get additional answers.
Okay. Is there, absent the funding being in the plan right now, is there another document that will be public that we'll be able to see that the full funding is still there, or is it really officially 1.5 million at this point?
What I'm used to seeing, and sometimes these things get released prior to like a work session, which I think we still have a few left, I believe, before the July hearings. But sometimes they also get released once it's adopted in July. But in the last CIP, there were very specific project pages dedicated, and even further itemizing what we meant by Crystal City Parks. And you could almost see the timeline for individual Market, Square and Center Park.
Mm-hmm.
I've not been able to find those to date. There's a few presentations and a few items get shifted over to active projects as well, which is a separate link on the CIP website. But that's something I'm circling back with my colleagues in DPR and see if that's something that can be made available.
Okay. All right. And then we've got the library, or those numbers. Do we have any information on those numbers? It looks like it tallies up to about the correct number, but any information on the timing?
Question mark for me is, the timing looks interesting. I don't know how it's being used, and that's the bigger question, given where we are right now. And I've not been made aware of any additional guidance about why that particular sum is shown in that particular year.
Okay. All right. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or comments on the proposed CIP? Okay, Matt, I guess what I'd like to do is let's make sure we can find something tangible on the Virginia Highlands Park funding. And if we don't see it by July 10th, or in the time running up to July 10th, we can write an email or something and request it. So we've got get a little more certainty on this.
Yep.
Okay. All righty. Okay, I think we're good on that. Let's move to the parking study then, and I will. Here we go. Let's see if I can.
So joining us, we do have a colleague from Department of Environmental Services. They'll be able to give you a status update of where we are.
Okay, great. Okay, I think I've released the share.
There it is.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, rather. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, thank you. Welcome.
Okay, great. My name is Mosi London. I'm a principal planner within the Department of Environmental Services, specifically the Parking and Curb Space Management team. First off, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I know this is an important study for your group as well as several of your members. So pretty much the overview to the next slide, is to really just talk about the background and the evidence of this study, talk about the scope of work, the schedule, and then just really leave a lot of time for questions and answers about the study. So with that, I just want to start with a little bit of background. So as you are all aware, there's been a long history of parking issues along the 23rd Street South corridor, specifically west of Richmond Highway. And these issues have been reported by individuals as well as residents, as well as business associations. And with that, the county has invested time and effort in conducting studies to understand those issues. So in terms of our records, the first study was conducted, or one of the more recent studies, almost 20 years old, but was conducted in 2005 by the University of Maryland. The methodology was to assess the supply and demand, conduct surveys and interviews with the interested stakeholders and populations, and then estimate changes in that the demand and supply. In terms of findings, there was a noted occupancy or high demand for public and private parking in the area, and recommendations included improving and managing parking supply, as well as the potential of implementing a shuttle satellite parking or a shared parking lot strategy. So this was some of the findings from 2005. Then in 2019, as a part of the county's regular processes, occupancy study was conducted, and this included collecting data by parking management type throughout the county at audited locations. So this included metered parking areas, so areas where there's metered parking between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., residential permit parking, so across the 26 zones, which I believe we have now, time-limited parking. So this is time-limited but unpaid. So this is our longer-term parking, such as our 8 or 12 hour, which may be time-limited, but no payment required, and then unmanaged. In terms of the data findings specifically for the 23rd Street area, there was data collected weekday and weekends about every 4 hours, so 8 a.m., 12 p.m., 4 p.m., and 8 p.m. To 10 p.m., so there were about 2-hour timeframes. The highest occupancy that was recorded was at the weekend at 10 p.m. So this was in 2019. So jumping to May 2022, which was the last time a study was conducted, for this one, similar findings were observed. Again, the weekend was the highest peak observed, but this time it shifted to 5 p.m. And again, I just go through this results just to note that, of course, with parking demand, it does shift depending on land uses. So it's always important to do these checkpoints to see where the shift. But a high occupancy point has always been the weekend, but there was a shift in the time. In terms of this specific study, the 23rd Street study, it's really as a result of the commitment that the county made in terms of conducting a curb space analysis as a part of the Crystal Houses site development, which was mentioned already on this call. So that site plan refers to 451 that was approved back in December of 2019. And then as a part of the development process, the request for proposal was sent out in 2022. So as you all know, this is definitely a long-term project. And one of the concerns was mainly the impact to the existing 22nd Street lot. So in terms of the study, the primary objectives were to gain an understanding of current parking utilization patterns, again, noted from the previous studies that they do change over time. The second objective was to identify discrepancies between needs and management approaches today. So specifically looking at where the needs of the community were expressed and where the current regulations are. And lastly, collaborate with businesses to enhance parking availability. So the target audience was businesses, but we did involve other stakeholders in terms of so not only the business owners and decision makers, but include their employees, patrons, and members of the community as they were part of the engagement. But again, the target audience was the business. So in terms of the task of the study, they're broken up into 3 areas: parking utilization, so collecting the parking occupancy across those different street regulation types, which in the map that you can see includes on-street spaces and off-street that are metered, so that's the red areas. It includes yellow areas, which is the RPP, the resident permit parking area. And then it does include some of the what I would call non-auto mobility options in the area. So it took an inventory of existing conditions for transit, bike share, and other alternative modes. And then the business survey, which was just focused on the business owners and their input. And then the last piece was just putting all that information together and developing a set of recommendations. So for parking utilization, again, this includes inventory management and assessment of existing infrastructure, as well as conducting the parking analysis. So for assessment, again, that includes the parking spaces themselves, what the regulation is, bike racks, scooters, crowds, transit spots, stops. As we know, all of this is connected in terms of the transportation network and the decisions that people make. For the parking analysis, this included doing camera data to understand the parking usage patterns. So we had stationary cameras that were set up collecting over a 24 to 48 hour period to observe vehicle movements. And a part of that analysis, private information was protected. So they weren't looking at license plates. It was just really looking at the usage of the parking. And then we also leveraged the performance parking data, which some of you may be familiar with, for the meter spaces in the parking lot, which we do currently have. So that was including the occupancy rates, as well as parking duration, so dwell time, how long parkers were in an individual space, and the turnover rate. In terms of the analysis, the turnover rate is probably the biggest piece because it's a sign of economic growth or productivity, that if you have a higher turnover rate, that means you have unique visitors to the location or using services there. So moving on to the existing conditions, parking utilization piece. The next step was the business survey. So this was conducted in 2 phases. The first phase was just the initial surveys conducted with business owners and managers. So this was conducted in person. It was really to get their sense of what were some of the issues or concerns related to parking in the area, focus on the business operations, including parking and mobility challenges. So again, that included about 13 to 15 businesses that are along the 23rd Street corridor. For phase 2, this was targeted at patrons and employees, and this was done through intercept surveys where we had our consultants that would be in front of the businesses or just walking around on 23rd Street, engaging with patrons after they parked. And this was the in-person aspect, but we also offered the opportunity for those that were being interacted with to submit their responses through a QR code. And we also did provide ability for respondents to submit their responses via a website survey that was posted. And compared to the business survey, this is really focusing on the individual parking behavior and perceptions of parking availability. And then the last piece was really just putting all those things together in terms of the findings and recommendations, really looking at how the existing parking conditions are operating within the time period. The time period for the analysis has been from November to May, and right now we're in the stage where we're wrapping up the study and looking at recommendations, and really looking at what the tools that we have in the short term, knowing that there are long-term changes that are. In terms of the schedule, so again, we conducted parking utilization data in December, March, and May. And then we conducted the business over surveys and intercept surveys from February to March. And again, right now we're just wrapping up the review of the data and socializing. So this is a part of our roadmap in terms of presentation. So right now it's just the overview of what the study includes, but after we wrap it up, if you're happy, I would like to come back so we can talk specifically about the results. But with that, I'm open to answering any questions that I'm able to at this time.
Yeah, thank you, Mosi. I guess I had a couple to just maybe help get some context. Did you get a sense of how much of the customer base, so to speak, going to the 23rd Street retail is pedestrian, like in terms of I know it's a parking study, but larger context is parking addressing, what percent of the overall customers who are coming to that area? Is it 100% or 50%? Do you have something that gets a handle on that?
Yeah, I could speak to that, and it may be just the kind of the fallacies of the methodology. So with the intercept service being conducted in person, you're just meeting people on the street. The majority of those people were people who were just walking in the area, so they're part of the community, the residents. And even in terms of the results that we found online, that was submitted online, that people who are aware or in tune to what was happening, the majority of those identified as being residents as well as walking. With that being said, we did analyze the data in terms of those who identified as, resident walking versus those who were visitors or driving, or people who were just residents to Arlington but driving. And you do notice that there is a difference, but primarily those who are walking and familiar with the area, they're not driving. They visit the areas, frequently. Do longer durations of stays based on the preliminary analysis of the data. So parking is not a concern. But then on the flip side, you see those who do drive, it's the reverse. So they feel that sometimes the parking availability is not necessarily the issue, but it's the duration of that. And that's something within our toolhouse we can provide more diversity. So I believe the majority of the parking on metered is just 2 hours. And sometimes that's just not enough to, even run an errand. Like you find a parking space, you go in, or even grab lunch, and then before you know it, the time is has passed. So the idea is maybe providing more variety of parking in the area, whether it's more short-term parking. So like we know for a lot of the restaurants, a lot of the business may be, Grubhub, Uber Eats, that, 15-minute parking targeted in certain areas may make more sense. But then for those who'd like to visit the area and want to have longer stays, we could do longer term programs. So those are all things within our toolkit that we can implement today if we had to. So it's just a question of what the results are. So the short answer of it is that it's just interesting based on the methodology that we use, the type of responses that we get. So I think for the in-person, just because of the type of outreach it was, you're meeting people on the street, the majority of those were walking and not doing a parking transaction. But we've definitely seen differences between those two types of responses.
Okay, thanks. Does anybody have any questions? I have a couple more. Okay, great. Pam.
You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious about the range that you were studying as far as area. Did you include like 24th Street and 25th Street in your study? Because we understand that that's a problematic area for the neighbors who live there. Did you include Fern going down to 18th Street? How broad was your area, and how did those, if you did study those areas, how did those results differ from your general results?
Yeah, that's a great question, Pamela. So if you can still see my presentation, so the study area is really just those four intersections. So 22nd and 23rd, and then South Fern to Southeast. But we do acknowledge within our analysis that there are other parking infrastructure facilities in the area just right across to South Richmond. You do have parking facilities on the other side, but we did limit it to this area, knowing that the primary area of concern is where the businesses are located, but we do not take for granted that there are impacts outside of this area that need to be taken into consideration as well. But the parking utilization, as well as I would say more of the parking utilization is primarily focused on this area, but then in terms of the business survey, we did reach out to businesses that were outside of this corridor as well, because they felt that they were being impacted by any change, or would be impacted by any changes to the 22nd Street lot.
All right, thank you. Robert. Oh, I can't hear you. Are you on mute? Not hearing you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think you said the recommendations from the study should come out in July next month. Is there a planned follow-on process that staff has based on those recommendations? And I know it might be difficult to say now, given that you don't exactly know what those recommendations are, but is there an anticipated timeline when any changes might be implemented?
That's a great question. I don't think we have a necessary timeline, but the intent is to roadshow the recommendations. Since it's become conducted by an independent party, of course, we'll take those recommendations and absorb the feasibility of it. But they have been crafted in development with the feedback from the study itself as well as the county. But the idea would be to implement this in the short term, and and I would say from my experience, I've been with the parking team about 2 years, that this is how we typically do some of those implementations just because it's in our toolkit. Like, I'm sure you may have noticed around the county that certain spaces have been converted. Like Sherlington is a great example where just because of the way that it is, Sherlington Village specifically, we can do these quick modifications and revert it. Like there was a time, it's crazy to think what Sherlington was just to had those, temporary ramps and all those, but because they're, temporary installations, we can convert. And this the same thing was with this sign. So let's say we wanted to do conversions really quick and add 15-minute parking, we could put temporary signage up, as soon as possible, and then wait to actually install the permanent signage. And then, of course, if we see that those changes have undue, impact where, now there's not enough parking for a longer term stay, we can revert that as well. So there is that iterative approach to it that we implement. So I think in terms of timeline, I would say that road showing for the month of July, we'll also have to do that internally with our leadership, since this is a high priority for them as well, and then come up with the final recommendations, which will be shown. So there's the recommendation from the consultant, and then it's the recommendation that we will proceed with the county for implementation. So yeah, I would say that we're not putting this on the shelf. We're going to be taking with it and running with it. And then I can also just to wrap it up. This has really been a framework for other studies that we do plan to have. We know that Arlington is a very diverse area, and each area is pretty unique. So we know that for this study, it's very small. That other studies, you'll need higher areas of granularity. And it's that variation of doing like metro areas versus, civic association versus just doing, this one, which is probably the lowest level of granularity, like the 4-point intersection analysis.
Thanks. Judy.
Yeah, I guess it's obvious that the 22nd Street lot is relied upon by the local businesses, and there isn't any way for us to know precisely when that goes away, but is that taken into account, or is that something that would have to be looked at down the road? Because I'm sure that the businesses, if they're concerned about parking now, their concerns are going to be much worse, and it's not obvious where that parking would go for their businesses, or what kind of an arrangement they might have with local developers to perhaps share parking. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Judy. I think that's a great question and point. So the intent for our study is really the short term, because as you said, the what's been communicated to us is that parking is a concern now. So we know when there are changes, it's probably going to be even a bigger concern. But I know that, and I'll let my other colleagues from CPHU or AED on the call, but it is my understanding that there has been a commitment and a timeline in place, but all of that is up for negotiation, as you know, with the site plan process as they go through the full reviews. But as it stands currently, I believe that no changes or impacts to the lot isn't slated until 2026 fall. And specifically, any impacts with that would just be spaces to accommodate the residents that are displaced, and it's a certain amount, and even that amount is still up for discussion. And I think with the data that we get from this, we'll be able to really understand what that would mean. So let's say that from our results, we find that the lot is occupied. And again, just throwing out as an example that the lot is occupied 80% of the time. So technically, there may be 20% excess capacity that would allow for the use for the displacement of residents during the construction. But then, of course, there's the subsequent phase when the lot is completely removed and there's the construction of the Crystal House building. It's, again, my understanding that there will be allocated specifically retail parking spaces that wouldn't be for the resident, would be for retail use in the building. But again, the exact number and how that looks like is up for negotiation. And it's something that I do for other projects all the time. And it's that back and forth.
Thank you. Yes, I think as the site plan becomes more into focus, having this kind of information, probably updated again, will be helpful in those negotiations, so that, you know, that there isn't an effort to just try to assume that maybe you only need 20 dedicated spaces when your data shows that that would be completely inadequate. Anyway,
and that's the hope.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Judy. Sorry, Mike, you're on mute.
Thanks. Thanks. I had one more question. The study months, November, March, May, I kind of feel is a long-term visitor to 23rd Street restaurants, that the summer is a different animal altogether. We have tourism, we have heat, people, so we have cars coming in from tourists. We have people who drive in the summer because it's so hot they don't want to walk. So I'd say July and August are going to be a little different than November, March, and May. What can you do to address that? That your study is not really covering the whole year. That's my concern.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mike. And I think you bring up a great point. I think with all the studies, even the one from 2005, 2019, and 2022, they all serve as snapshots. But we are in a unique position that we weren't in before, where we're continuing collecting data for the on street meter spaces as well as the off-street lots. So beyond the scope or duration of this project, we'll still be collecting data into the summer months, into the fall, and we'll be continuing to use that. I think it's harder when you just do these snapshots and you're making decisions based on data that, you know, as soon as you collect it, it's kind of dated. But with this, because we're doing the snapshot, but we also will be doing continuing data collection, we'll be able to observe that. And we know that there's definitely seasonality that we observed. And again, leverage thanks to the performance parking data, because when we started collecting that data, we were actually collecting data at the beginning of August. So we do have data for the lots potentially from August till now. So August 2023 to now. And then this study just covers data collection from, I believe, November to May, because we have to scope it at a certain point. But for the county, we'll be taking those additional months into consideration when we're doing that analysis. But it's a great point. But I think we're in a unique position because we'll still be collecting data ongoing. So I really see these just as snapshot analysis because they're more robust, but we'll be continuing to analyze data that we'll collect.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mosey. Does anybody have any other questions? Jeff, hi. Go ahead, please.
Where will the full study be published? And when will the full study be published so that people who are interested in digging in can take a look at it?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that, Jeff. The hope is to at least have everything finalized and up by, I would say, the end of July. At least that's my target for myself. I know with the end of fiscal year and then wrapping up a study at the end of fiscal year can be challenging, but that's the commitment that our consultants and our team has made. So our intent is to kind of quote unquote do a road show for the month of July. And then similar to the what we've done in the past for any updates related to the study, will be posted on the study website. So, and I can quickly put that in the chat, but I'll make sure to communicate with this group and Matt, whoever, so that you'll know when it's posted. It won't just be posted without any notifications.
Great, thanks. Meg, hi, Meg. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I wanted to just one more question on the fact that we're not gaining information on June, July, and August, which we do see a change in numbers across the neighborhood as we get more tours and parking and the like. You mentioned that you guys are going to take that into consideration, but are you able to quantify that? My question relates to if we see a 40% increase in the amount of vehicles, that differs than if we see a 15 or 10% increase. And changing how we look at parking structure in the area and movement of people will change with those numbers too. And so just wanted to voice concern and see if you could quantify the considerations that the county will take, since we didn't deliver the study in the summer months.
Yeah, thank you for that, Meg. So I think it's twofold. So I think anecdotally, we know that there is a seasonality difference between parking that aligns with school schedules, just the nature of business in the area. But I think quantitatively we'll have the data, but there would be gaps because we don't even have a full year's worth of data. So again, we started collecting data for the lots in August, but again, this is a pilot project, so we don't. It's again how reliable that data is, but we will have data coming up going into this upcoming summer that will cover those summer months. So even though for the study itself is scoped with this definitive stop and start time just because of the nature of the study, we will have access to be able to do that analysis. So I would say that this memo really just shows that a snapshot and a framework that we can use those analyses and methodologies to continue to do the calculation. Because I would say that the main elements that we wouldn't have access to, which would be great year round, would be the camera analysis that was conducted where they're doing stationary cameras, doing the analysis of the movement of vehicles, which is another way to verify the occupancy data. So they're looking at both of those in comparison. And they also use that to look at RPP, because for that, you're able to look at decal on a vehicle and know whether they're actual RPP vehicles using the space or not. And then the survey aspect where we won't have, consultants around. But in terms of the occupancy data, dwell time, turnover, we will have that data. It would just, we're waiting on it to analyze and do the comparison. But we know that there may be differences year to year based on changes in land uses. I won't dare to hypothesize, but we know that there are a lot of changes that are happening in the Richmond Highway corridor. A lot of developments online, changes that were kind of unforeseen. So I think it's something that we have to continually monitor, but we will have data, which is not something that the county has before. It's been kind of anecdotal or just snapshots when we've had a consultant. So having this continual access to data is great. And it's data that you can look at right now today for yourself on the dashboard.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thanks, Meg. Thanks, Mosey. Does anybody else have any other questions? I guess I'd have a question for Matt. Do these studies, how will these drive any of the subsequent planning? And I know we, as Judy mentioned, we got Crystal House 5, which is going to sit where a parking lot was planned. The parking lot is in a multi-level parking lot was originally planned. We certainly have, if you go up 23rd Street at night, you can see people trying to park and getting frustrated as they inch along 23rd Street and can't figure out, they just don't even know where to park. How does Mosey's study, how do you see that moving forward and defeating some of the subsequent planning activities?
Yeah, I think there's benefits in just understanding information and findings that are data driven, particularly if it's recent data. I guess we are at a point where we can consider certain things post-pandemic. But I think the distinction between seasonality and how the numbers significantly change during the summer, I think will need to be considered further. For me, I think it's, there's some probably low-hanging fruit in terms of signage and how intuitive is it for a visitor to find parking. And perhaps there's some advantages to considering, okay, are there some near-term things we can, pursue and identify? I think any subsequent amendments to the site plan for Crystal Houses 5, I think will be really critical in understanding what that building will deliver, both in terms of residential units, overall density, and what seems to be a huge question for my mind is the ground story condition and what's there. And how does that relate to the rest of the block? Going back to what Mosey mentioned, which was, I believe, a condition language that was associated with that project that spoke to that reservation of certain spaces in the garage. What it means for more midterm conditions, if we ever go down the path of studying 23rd Street, it certainly could be some, helpful background information, maybe a building block from which we can then, take it a step further. We've seen it done multiple ways, but I envision it's something we want to keep coming back to because there's always a need for new data and current findings.
Matt, Nick Cummings here too, and I represent both the APA and EYA teams, and particular to Crystal House 5. It's going to be a while before we file anything on that site. I think it's a little further off in the schedule, so we'll have plenty of opportunity to take a look at the results of this study, but also to talk with staff about how they view the results and what we might be expected to do with that building, if at all different from what's entitled right now.
Oh, great. Thanks, Nick. Okay. All right, great. Hey, Mosey, thanks so much for getting us up to date on this. And we'll look forward to getting the analysis and seeing what, hearing back from 23rd Street businesses on their thoughts.
Yeah, so I could plan to attend. It seems as if this is quarterly, so I could plan to attend the next quarterly meeting and have an update. But I won't hesitate to share any things doing the interim of that as well. Thank you again.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Let's move on to the next topic. It's we've got a presentation from the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative folks, and I think we're all really interested in that and what the findings are and how they might apply to Crystal and Pentagon City.
Sure, great. Thank you so much. My name is Jill Hunger. I am the Assistant Director over at the Department of Community Planning, Housing, and Development. I'll be doing a brief presentation this evening, and let's just all hope that technology is in my favor.
Great. Hi, Jill. Thanks for coming.
Certainly. Here we go. And so making certain everybody can see this?
Yep.
And I can't see you, unfortunately, so verbal cues are great. Thank you very much. So again, the Commercial Market Resiliency Initiative, CMRI, we're into sort of the 2.0. So I wanted to provide you a little bit of background and context for sort of the why, our guiding principles and strategic goals and the approach associated with it, and some of the recent actions and the ongoing work, which you might be more interested in understanding. So again, I think, sort of taking it back a little bit and recognizing sort of what is going on in the market today. So I think likely many of you that are going into the office, that you recognize your employers are still balancing return to office and the work from home policies. The overall commercial values have been impacted by some of the sustained vacancies and rising loan defaults. The valuation of the office properties continue to see some decline, but sort of counter to that, we are seeing some flight to quality office properties. So with that in mind, Arlington does still remain an incredibly attractive location for high-tech and federal contracting tenants. But again, all of this in mind, we need to continue evolving our supply to meet the new market demands. So we really wanted to take a quick look at the scale of the potential impact and looked at sort of office vacancy, starting in 2013, sort of crept up, dropped a bit, and then we've just sort of seen this climb and at 23.2%. What does that mean? That's about 10 million square feet or so of office space that is vacant. So we have about 328 office buildings of 44 million square feet of rentable building area. Staff has continued to analyze sort of what that market is, and we think that about 40% or so of the RBA is at risk for sustained vacancy and obsolescence. So trying to figure out, so what do we do? And then we need to recognize, like, why does that matter? You know, what do these vacancies mean to Arlington? So I think for a long time, Arlington had held on to a 50-50 split between its residential and commercial tax bases. So I think everybody realizes that a decrease in the commercial property tax revenue sort of shifts more of that burden to residential tax revenue. And that when these services decrease, revenues decrease, services and programs that benefit all of our residents are impacted. And another piece of why this matters is truly from a placemaking perspective, and that strong placemaking elements contribute to an amenity-rich environment, attracting residents, visitors, and employees to the space. So with these challenges, with that shifting market, we've recognized we have an oversupply of office space when we're seeing a demand that's at an all-time low. The potential for structural office vacancy requires us to look at new ways to drive economic growth. And finally, we realize that we're not the only one facing this. And quite truthfully, like, other jurisdictions regionally and nationally are looking at this as well. And we, you know, to remain resilient, we need to sort of act on sort of the next steps of this commercial market resiliency initiative. So with this, the commercial market resiliency initiative, sort of two parts of it. One, addressing office demand, and that's really working, you know, very closely with our Arlington Economic Development, their business investment group, in looking at how do we retain and expand our existing businesses and tenants, and looking at, you know, how do we start attracting sort of the high growth companies. What this piece is looking at is how do we start rethinking our office supply, and that's through the streamlining zoning and land use processes to and sort of enable our alternative uses, conversions, and redevelopment. So I think the sort of the key terms that we've been trying to push is, like, how can we best remove some regulatory barriers for market solutions, and in looking at both our office demand and our office supply. So a little bit of a primer on the CMRI 1.0, and that was really focusing sort of on that former, sort of the demand side, and how could we accommodate a range of existing and emerging new uses. So we were looking at sort of these new or expanded uses in commercial buildings, both on the ground floor, in upper stories, and how do we manage those. But all along, we recognized we needed to do some other process changes. And that's taking us sort of how do we start looking at this next phase of the commercial market resiliency initiative. So with that in mind, because the level of office vacancy reinforces the importance of these efforts, we again wanted to remove unnecessary barriers, but making certain we remain generally consistent with Arlington's overall plans, policies, and our future visions. So again, CMRI 1.0 focused exclusively on updates to the zoning ordinance. The CMRI 2.0 includes several other work streams that really look at sort of three big buckets of focus: redevelopment, which could mean like tear downs and reconstruction of an entirely new building. But in some instances, maybe parking is retained. There could be conversions, and that would be more of, sort of this adaptive reuse piece of it, of converting an existing building to another use. It could be paired with the addition of new floors to the building. And then finally, sort of this repositioning and making significant investments in existing office buildings to upgrade the market competitiveness. So again, in an earlier slide, that flight to quality, that's really hitting this piece of it. So, recognizing we have these three big buckets, and then we have some specific strategic goals, and that would be improving efficiency and cost of our redevelopment processes, streamlining our processes for building repositioning, creating a new process or a different type of process for adaptive reuse, addressing regulatory relief tools for capturing tenant demand, and as I pointed out, enhancing placemaking efforts. So again, that gets us to sort of this greater focus on process changing. So the commercial market resiliency 2.0 really is looking at the building supply side of things. And it's really intended to tackle the big regulatory issues resulting in changes that are apropos of the challenge of the structural change in our commercial market. So really, it's what are the recent actions and ongoing work? So our county board's taken several actions. In April and May, they adopted several zoning ordinance amendments, and it included updated parking ratios for athletic and health clubs, and it eliminated some prohibitions for compact parking spaces. They adopted a zoning ordinance amendment to address shared parking, both on site for our some of our commercial and community shopping centers, and also off-site of how can we accommodate some of our uses as they change over time. They also adopted large media screens and changed that term to outdoor visual entertainment, really focusing them around our urban shopping centers and sort of our larger commercial shopping centers as well. And then in April and then May again, they did some broad requests to advertise with respect to adaptive reuse and sign flexibility, and then also new and or expanded uses. So again, since those broad requests to advertise in April and May, we've continued to look at staffing resources and how best to prioritize. So really leaving on this note of what are we doing as we're going into the third and fourth quarter and beyond. And I think what we're looking at is the building repositioning and adaptive reuse as a priority. First, as a policy framework to look at all forms of obsolete office buildings, with sort of a priority to address reinvestment in existing office buildings for repositioning or conversion. And that the policy itself may tee up future studies for partial or full redevelopment, which could, as I had mentioned earlier, retain an existing parking garage. So really looking at that policy framework, understanding best practices and lessons learned from others, looking at the process and targeted changes to our zoning ordinance. Excuse me. And another piece that we've been looking at, sort of how we amend our site plans administratively and legislatively, and excuse me, really trying to understand how can we best improve our processes. Sorry about that, folks. Align with our permitting system, having a more holistic record-keeping capabilities, and ultimately align with other policies, such as our retail plan. So that's my last slide. Thank goodness. And hopefully I can stop coughing. Mike, I can't hear you.
Yeah, mute Mike.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, I'll ask a question slowly to give you a minute. So one of the things I guess I had a couple questions, but one of the questions I have relates to a comment that Eric Castle, the Crystal City Civic Association president, had a couple of weeks ago, which is we in our area, we're often concerned about the kind of the provisioning of retail businesses in terms of not just the vacancies, but what Eric characterizes the side street businesses, not the high street businesses, but the dry cleaners and the hardware stores and the businesses that tend to have lower margins and simply can't afford to be in this area. And I'm wondering, does the CMRI, are you looking to address what one might consider market failures, or are you just trying to fill offices and fill the space in any way possible? I shouldn't say that so it sounds pejorative. That's a noble thing in itself. But are you trying to target some of the gaps that the communities are identifying in terms of to create a walkable community? You need to have a lot of retail and services that maybe aren't high street services, and they need really affordable spaces to do business.
So we look to the market to provide and to curate the types of retail. And in some ways they are much more knowledgeable about what the needs are on the street in those areas. What we are trying to do are a couple different things with respect to ensuring that our processes are easy or easier as we're moving forward for tenants to get into the space. And that's a couple of different ways. So they understand what kind of space that they're going into. Is that use permitted? Trying to alleviate, some of the work around parking was to ensure that they don't get, in a weird position of like, well, that's great, and that space was already built, but you need 3 more parking spaces than that previous use. And they're like, but they're already built. So we're trying to remove some of those hurdles. So that's on the sort of the side that we've been working on. And then I will say, we have a very robust biz launch program, and they work very closely, almost tirelessly, with our small business community and those businesses that are looking to come into spaces. And they often do a lot of the legwork of, can they go into these spaces? So that's oftentimes a big question, can they go into those spaces? So again, more trying to eliminate the hurdles and allow the market to start filling those spaces.
Mike, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes. So thanks. What questions do folks have? Really interested in some of the developers, Jay and Robert. Any thoughts or questions you have on this? I will start with Judy.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something that I think toward the beginning, where you said that typically the tax revenue was roughly 50-50. It just seems to me that that's something that's really hard to explain to people in single family neighborhoods who thinks that they're being taxed to death, when in fact they're being supported by the commercial market. But in any case, it does seem to me as many as vacancies that exist in the office buildings, at least in our area, many of those obsolete buildings are coming down in favor of residential. And we already have, of course, a lot of residential buildings which seem to be pretty healthy. But I assume that even though those of us who live in them are residents, they are in fact commercial. And so I would think at least that part of the commercial market isn't doesn't appear to be suffering as greatly as the office. But is that? But you do what appears to be residential really are commercial in your calculations, I assume.
And my colleague Mark McCauley was able to join, and I will allow him to take that question. He is with Arlington Economic Development.
Okay,
thank you. Mark McCauley, Real Estate Development Director at Economic Development. Yes, Judy, I'm just confirming that, yes, that's absolutely the case. So the 50-50 split, often people don't know that includes multifamily income producing apartments as part of the commercial. And the growth in that sector, both in terms of valuations and in terms of number of units, has helped stave off a more dramatic decline in the 50-50 split. It's now 46, 54, something like that, in favor of single family, low density residential. And a lot of that is because multifamily has continued to support that number itself, and the office and retail as well as post-pandemic has recovered somewhat. It's really been the office sector that has taken the biggest decline.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Yeah, thanks, Jill, for the presentation. I think from the development community and the presentations on CMRI that I've been involved with, a consistent drumbeat has been to continue to refine or clarify how these projects will be treated as either major site plan amendments, minor site plan amendments, or admin changes. And I know that a number of times throughout the presentation, you referenced new processes or refined processes that these projects might be considered under. And I don't know if there had been any additional clarification or refinement from staff's thinking about when those new processes might be rolled out.
Sure, and thanks for asking. I think one of our first steps, especially around sort of the terminology and what they are, was trying to ensure that personally our house was in order, and we were realizing sometimes even sort of the administrative change processes, and just for clarification, these might be facade changes or landscape plan changes of like one tree versus a different type of tree, or timing of a condition because the project's delivering in December and you really can't be planting certain things. So again, sort of that's the breadth of these administrative changes. But we were recognizing we weren't always getting complete applications, or they were being rejected very quickly and taking a very long period of time. So I think the idea was we wanted to get our house in order first. So there's been a lot of work on sort of process mapping, ensuring that we clarify what we're looking for in all of these applications, and then establishing sort of a standard operating procedure so everybody, all staff that's working through it, knows to pick up the phone and do a quick call of saying this is what's going on. Can we fix it? So the idea is to get that in order first. That's almost done. And then sort of that next big step is taking a broader look of like, exactly what are we seeing? What is the board seeing with respect to minor site plan amendments? What, understanding the thresholds and everything like that. So I think sort of that's, as we're moving into the third and fourth quarter, that's what we're going to start seeing.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll just add on, and actually, Judy, you mentioned this as well. In terms of the specific issue of adaptive reuse and building repositioning, we're going to start the policy framework this fall and quickly move into discussions of implementation by the end of 2024. And the policy will not be fully implemented. We're still working on the policy, obviously, and we'll look at a variety of options of processes that help streamline the process while engaging for the appropriate level of consideration of how you amend a site plan. So more to come on that this summer and fall on what that policy framework looks like and how it may relate. And then Judy, you mentioned, which is absolutely true, for many years, we didn't really have a lot of interesting conversions because redevelopment was such a powerful incentive for developers. Obviously, we're getting a lot more now over the past 18 months as full redevelopment has hit the commercial markets. and isn't as viable in some cases. And so we're getting a lot more interest in, well, can I buy another 10 years, another 15 years with this building by converting it to something and then come back to the redevelopment when it's more viable. So that's why, while we've been talking about this for a long time and our neighbors have plans and policies in place that they've been working on, probably over the past 18 months, we've gotten the most interest of developers. That still means that it's probably going to be at most a couple of buildings a year. It's not going to be 20 or 30 buildings. It's going to be a very case by case basis.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, Robert. Jay.
I'll just note, and thanks for the presentation, Jill. I just pasted in the chat. JBG announced earlier this week that we're making a significant investment in our 2011 Crystal Drive office building for many of the reasons that Jill mentioned. We want to upgrade this building to attract the best tenants in the market and bring this up to modern standards. For each of our office buildings, the situation's a little different, but this one we thought was well positioned to make that investment and be competitive in this new market. So you can read more in the article, but it hits a lot of the themes that Jill mentioned in her presentation. And we just happened to announce it this week. So I thought it was good timing to share.
Great. Thanks so much, Jay. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and lastly, I appreciate the county. We had a site plan process to facilitate this, and I know Mark and his colleagues at AED and the rest of the county were very helpful in accommodating that site plan amendment to enable this repositioning. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jay. Any other questions or comments from folks? I think I just had one more is kind of fundamental or kind of 101 type of question, Joe. What your slide on the vacancy rate, what do you consider like kind of a healthy vacancy rate? What's the point at which you say it's good, it's not too tight, it's not too vacant?
You want to take that one, Mayor Robert? I mean, if you can find a place in the world that has a healthy vacancy rate, we may have made a benchmark off it. But traditionally, going back in basic theory, sort of 8 to 10% for office was seen as a pretty healthy with frictional vacancies and leases rolling over. Obviously, most places around the country are in that range of mid to high teens to 20s, and even in some cases like San Francisco, I don't know what they are now, but obviously hit a peak at almost 30% or even above 30%. But yeah, I mean, traditionally you want to get to 8-10%. And I think Jill made the great point in her slide of that's probably not going to all come from demand growth, given the way that spaces are used differently in terms of occupation of office. And so supply, one of the ways you reduce that number is you reduce supply as well, and get some of that non-competitive space, but still dragging down the market space off the marketplace.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. Okay, good. And I assume, do you anticipate a CMRI 3.0? I mean, are you just going to keep? I mean, I think it's great that you're just continuing to adapt. Is this a standing, continuous evolving thing?
No, I we've had this conversation, and I think at a certain point, rather than it be, an initiative, it is just something that we do. And that, quite truthfully, as part of being a resilient community, we look at climate resiliency. I think we have to start looking at our commercial market resiliency, environmental resiliency. So I think that it's sort of wrapped up in all of that.
Okay, great. Great. Well, thanks, Jill, and thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Great.
Bye.
Okay, let's move to our last presentation of the evening. Folks from APA are going to talk through a minor site plan amendment for the townhouses and the Crystal Houses site.
Yeah, welcome. Nick Cummings here with Walsh Colucci, land use attorney for the applicant for this phase of the Crystal House development, which is actually EYA. This is a market rate phase. We're excited to present to you tonight. I have Jack Lester and Jack McLaurin here with me from EYA. Some very brief background before I turn this over to them. The original approval for the development was in 2019. We had a series of SPRC meetings and open houses on park design, leading up to commission meetings in the county board. It was actually approved in December of 2019, the same day as Amazon's Met Park buildings, the phase 1 of HQ2. In the years since, my former client sold the property to the Washington Housing Conservancy, which then donated infill development rights on site to Arlington. Arlington sought out a partner to build that development with a huge focus on affordable housing. Those partners are APA and EYA. We've previously made changes to 2 other buildings, CH6 with approval of that last year in October, and CH3, which was approved just back in April. Both of those phases were 100% affordable housing, CH6 being a senior focused building and CH3 being a bit focused on families with some larger units. These are instead market rate row homes, which Jack will discuss in more detail now. So go ahead, yes.
Great. Thank you, Nick. I'm Jack Lester. I'm a partner with EYA, and we are in a venture with APA. We're responsible for the development of 7 and 8 and 4, and they, as Nick said, are doing parcel 3 and 6 at Crystal House. I've got with me my partner at EYA, Jack McLaurin. Jack has been there. I've been at EYA 20 plus years. He's been there longer. He doesn't show it, but he's designed most of the architecture and land plans that we've developed over the last 32 years. Not going back to 32 years, but a lot of those. In addition, I've got Will and Ben from EYA, my colleague on the development side. Angelina's out on vacation today. And then we've got Nick, of course, our landscape architect, Dan, and Travis, our civil engineer, if we get into more technical questions. So that's our team. Jack, if you can pull up the presentation, we'll talk a little bit about EYA and then go through our kind of vision for this site. And then Jack will take it over and kind of walk through the details of the site plan, the land plan, the public spaces, and the architecture. So go to the next one. And that's a slight delay I'm getting.
Sorry, Jack, I'm trying to make it go here.
Okay.
There we go.
There it is. So as I mentioned, we've been in business now. We're in our 33rd year. We are, you may know us, I'll pull up a map here in a second of some of the locations we develop. We focus on infill areas, primarily inside the Beltway and near metro stations. We're a 120 person plus or minus company that takes on 2 or 3 projects a year and puts all our efforts into delivering what our brand promises to our customers, to the communities in which we build, to elected officials is a life within walking distance, super high quality design, and a really community oriented focus. So previewing, here's where we build. As I said, just 2 to 3 a year, and we put intense focus on getting the plan right, the architecture right, the land plan, so that it fits within the context in which we're building. Let's go to the next one. Here is just some examples of a couple of recent projects. The work we completed a few years back at Robinson Landing, a project down in the lower left, Cabin John. That was a tight infill project at a what is a supermarket out in Bethesda. We turned a supermarket parking lot, unused parking lot, into 42 or 48 townhomes. Reservoir District in the upper middle is our 20-acre project in the heart of the District of Columbia, right off of North Capitol by Children's Hospital. We will be breaking ground and going vertical there in a few weeks. And it's relevant also because we have a similar product type to what we're proposing here. And some of you may know, if you've been in the area for 20 years ago, you would have seen us developing the residential component of Clarendon Park project. We were and continue to be proud of how we solved a kind of a complex problem of shielding the residential area from the commercial uses there. So at a very high level, Jack, as I said, will go into detail, but we're coming to you today to kind of discuss our plans for this component, this one of the 4 components on the Crystal House property. We're building off of what was an approval that Nick pursued and achieved for the prior owner back in 2019. And I think just, again, at a very high level, I think we believe the enhancements and the improvements we've made on that include the adding of more housing, the adding of housing that, at least in Arlington, a more attainable price point that was originally conceived. Highly designed public spaces. I think you'll get a sense of the work that Jack and Dan have done to create those. Exceptional architecture and material, and we know that's a little bit in the eye of the beholder, but we think that this is we're starting at a great place with the architecture. Sustainable building practices. We're incorporating the best practices in stormwater management. We're doubling the dedicated parking spaces for the residents of Crystal House 7 and 8 than what was previously approved. We're providing more bike parking than what was in the earlier plan. Importantly, we're creating more land value for the county. So this is county grant land in effect. What we're able to pay for that goes to the county to further their goals for affordable housing. We think we've improved the pedestrian connectivity, and I know it's important to many folks, as it is to us, increasing the tree canopy. So I think there's a lot of enhancements over what was originally considered in 2019, and Jack can take us through some of the details. I guess the last piece I'll leave you with is that chart there in the lower left. Based on, we estimate now, right, we're in this county process, we estimate that we'd be closing and beginning construction in approximately 18 months, Q1 of 26, and that construction would likely be less than 2 years because it is only 42 homes, but somewhere in the 18 to 24 months to complete the project. Let's go to the next slide, Jack, and then you can again, here's just some very high details. Jack will provide more specifics on this, but the unit types, the parking, and the square footage of the entire development.
Okay, thanks, Jack. I appreciate it. And again, we're here to talk. I'm going to stay off camera, by the way, because when I'm sharing my screen and doing the video, sometimes there's a little glitch. So I'm just going to stay off camera a little bit. So you know the site very well, but we have South Fern Street on the top of the page and 18th Street South on the right-hand side of the page. This is the existing pool here today and the existing Crystal House 1. CH is an abbreviation for Crystal House. So if you hear me talk about CH, I'm just trying to be clear on that. So we have what we call 8A and 8B, and then we have Crystal House 7. And I would just like to start with, Jack was flattering me by saying I've been doing EYAs for a long time, doing their work for a long time. I've been inside of EYA for about 9 or 10 years, and it's project like this that really gets me excited and why I came over to EYA. We feel like we have come up with a solution. Jack went through kind of a bullet list of what we think are the improvements, but the idea of enhancing the product, the home styles for missing middle, we think is very critical, and this is really kind of addressing that. You guys are a very savvy board, and I'm sure you've been dealing with this missing middle crisis for quite a while, and I hope that you're going to see that we fulfill that obligation here. You do know the site well, I'm sure. You know that the site starts to get kind of in a bowl. The public sidewalk is up high, and the further you get toward 18th Street, it does get more and more below 18th Street. We are not really revising the grading that much, although we're putting more detail on the grading. One of the things that was important to us was not totally disrupting the previous approval. This community association here, as well as the developer and the county, put to that 4.1 that was previously approved. And there's a lot of good components to it that we tried to leave alone. So we didn't want to we didn't want to disrupt that approval too much and start from scratch, hence the minor amendment. This here is an example of how similar we are. If you can see this, the black line work is our current proposal, and the red line is the prior footprints. So you can see from a lot coverage or building footprint standpoint, we're essentially the same as what was previously approved. We're actually a little bit less over here on this side. Maybe we're a little bit deeper from a front to back standpoint. Again, a little bit less and then a little bit less. So the public spaces, the park spaces, lot coverage, all that is really the same as it was before. What we have done here, Jack referenced, is the prior approval had what I would call a through townhome type of design, where this entire footprint would have been the townhome. And what we have done is we've tried to create what we call a back-to-back. It is a townhome that is this R and T. R stands for roof and T stands for terrace, but the footprint of each home is really half the dimension as it used to be. And that's how we're able to increase the density on the site. We feel like this is something that I'm going to show you some plans here in a second, but that the market is really going to appreciate. The benefit of that is not only now do we have a front doors and streetscape facing Fern Street, we also have front doors and streetscapes facing the interior of the site, which what used to be kind of back a house and a garage elevation is now somebody's front door and sidewalk. And so we, in terms of eyes on the street and enhancing public safety, we feel pretty strong about that. The other thing is we still have one common garage underneath CH 8A and 8B, and then there's a separate and distinct garage on CH 7 over here. So that part of the previous approval is still intact. This is a landscape plan to show you some of our public spaces. We have lawn panels, we have some streetscape enhancements and planting around the pool. Because of the lead walk and the access to these front doors, we are slightly massaging the roof terrace. We're working with APA on what this is going to look like, maintaining their grilling components and everything that was important to them. We still have this highly important park space here in the central part of the site. It's important to the county and the residents. It is a pedestrian connection from the existing neighborhood down through the site into the other end of the site. So that stays intact. We have what we call a hyphen park over here in this number 2, for lack of a better term. And then we have this sort of common, more privatized park in here with public access from 18th Street. It's important to know that all these spaces are open to the public. We have handicap accessibility in these 2 spaces. We do not have it over here from 18th Street down into this area over here, but everything else is fully accessible. And the other thing that we try to do through our process is provide more definition to these spaces. It's our feeling that some of the grading wasn't really fully thought out. Some of the landscape design was shallow in detail. So we really try to drive into it in further detail. This image here is to show you that really the connectivity from a pedestrian standpoint is essentially still intact as it was before. There are no changes to the streets. Garage ramps down on the end of 8A and the garage ramps down on 7 over here. That's very close to being the same as it was before. So this is our pedestrian connectivity exhibit. Now we're going to start to look at some of the renderings. If I come over here and look at what I call the central park, we are in our site looking towards Fern Street. And this is some of that grade that I was telling you about. And you actually have to go up to get onto Fern Street because of how low we are over here. There is a kind of a neat random stone pattern over here. I'll show you another image in a second. And then we have a more accessible route over here on this side. This is a more aerial view. I'm still inside the site, but I'm now maybe on a roof terrace of one of our homes. And you can see this the stepped connectivity over here, and then adjacent to it is the more circuitous handicap ramps. I think both of these are accessible, but excuse me, from an ADA standpoint, we are certainly refining these things, these designs a little bit. We think we're in pretty good shape now, but through this community process, we're listening and we're trying to make enhancements, and we might reduce some of this paving a little bit, but the functionality will still be the same, and you can see the lush landscaping. So this is what we call the Central Park over here. And then now this is this lawn perspective. This is the one over here that's adjacent to 18th Street. And so, like I said, on the interior of the site, what used to be a garage face is now habitable space with front doors over here. And then this is the connection that we're proposing up onto 18th Street. The previous approval required a masonry wall to extend up to our railing height here. And we wanted to crack that open a little bit and say, how about instead of a masonry wall, we do it in a more artistic ornamental rail type of feature. And I think the reason for the masonry before was that this is, again, it was a garage space, and then there was the garage entrance over into the CH6 on this side. Excuse me. So we feel like now that we've improved this public space down here, and we know that the residents and the public are going to use this staircase, we wanted to do something a little more enhanced and do it more in an artistic fashion. And I think we've gotten some good response. We're still in with the county. We submitted our plan a little while ago. We're still having some feedback back and forth, but we've had some initial positive response from the county on this idea here. This is now what I call the hyphen park. Since we have the architecture on the screen here, I will say that we kind of appreciated the architecture from the previous approval and didn't want to disrupt it too much. The materials are the same. Some of the detailing is the same. It's just the configurations are a little bit different because of the building typology that we're proposing here. But this is that entrance to what I call the hyphen park. If I go to an aerial, it starts to make a little bit more sense. So this is the public sidewalk on Fern Street. This is how you can access that hyphen park and get to the interior of the site, closer towards the pool area on this side, or the handicap ramp system so that people with disabilities or grocery carts or baby carriages, baby strollers can still get up into the site. But you can see lush landscaping. It's important to note that below this park is the top of our garage. And I think that's one of those elements that wasn't really fully thought through. And how do you plant these pieces and these components in this landscaping on top of a concrete garage? And we've kind of worked with some of the detailing and sections to really try to make that happen. So doing a little bit more work on the design shows that we can deliver on what we're showing you on the screen right now. This again is the architecture. We actually took the same rendering and the same view that was in the previous approval and just re-rendered it with our proposed design. We wanted to make sure everybody had an apples to apples comparison if they were to hold them up side by side. This is where you start to get into our building typology from a number of stories standpoint. As I mentioned, the garage is buried below Fern Street, which is where we're standing now. But we have our main living, dining, kitchen level here. And then we have our master bedroom suite on the second floor above grade. And then we have a loft level with a roof terrace up on the third floor above grade. That loft level is set back. The previous approval had a very large penthouse stair access to the roof terrace. They had more of a full roof terrace. And again, part of this missing middle and being more attainable, we wanted to turn some of this into habitable space and shrink the roof terrace a little bit. But it is set back by about 12 feet from the front facade. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on the height here in a second. This is our floor plan. And what's kind of neat about this is half of the back to back. So that spine that I was telling you along the length of the building is this, what we call party wall here. And then each unit is demised from each other unit by these other party walls. So literally, if you mirror this front to back, and then you mirrored it side by side, That's how the building is configured. As Jack mentioned, these are fee simple and for sale. We've done a lot of work with Shahryar in the building department to make sure that it's something he can approve and we can get our ownership the way we want it. And we've gotten to a point where I think everybody's really comfortable. So in the garage level, which is largely buried except for that CH7 piece of the site, you drive into the main common garage between the two, underneath the back-to-back homes, and that has a secured overhead door on it. And then you immediately turn into your own parking spaces. You get out of your car, and now you're in your house. You're within your own finished stairwell, and you're going upstairs. So everybody has 2 parking spaces dedicated for themselves with a print. And then you come upstairs into a kitchen level with a powder room, and you continue upstairs to the master bedroom suite with a large luxury walk-in closet, nice generous says powder room, but obviously this is a full bath. And then we have a kind of an office piece or what we call maybe a Peloton room for the homeowners over here, and then laundry and the mechanical, and then you continue upstairs. And this is why that loft level is so important to us, is it's integral to the program. We have 2 bedrooms with a full bath and then the roof terrace. If somebody wanted to take one of those bedrooms and turn it into a loft because they only needed 2 bedrooms and they appreciated the open loft, that they have the optionality and the ability to do that. And then obviously the roof level up over here. We are proud to say that we are all electric here. Again, checking some of those sustainability boxes in the county. We had a great meeting with the county's green building staff last week to kind of tell them some of our vision. We have a pretty high bar on our green building requirements consistent with the prior approval, but we will be all electric here, which we're really excited about. This now starts to talk about the height. We have CH6 over here on this side. We have our buildings, and then we have some existing homes across Fern Street to start to give you an idea of height, mass, and scale. This is cut through CH8A, which is towards the western part of the site. Similar, just another diagram. If you happen to live in this house, I think we had somebody in our last Aurora Hills meeting that said they do live in that house. We did not survey these buildings. These are plus or minuses. We kind of eyeballed them, but we feel like we're pretty close, both from a grading along the street and sidewalk, but also the overall massing of the building. So you can see from a massing standpoint, we are pretty consistent with what the immediate neighborhood is. This exhibit here is to show you, Jack mentioned, this is our Cabin John project in Potomac. This is to show you this idea of how the height is going to feel, especially with the roof terrace and the setback loft. Certainly there are views like you see here where you can see the loft a little bit more, but really from the street, and we're even across the street and then some, you really don't perceive that loft level. So we don't have this sort of extreme staircases outside here. We will have some, probably more like what you see down the middle of the building. But I put this slide in here so that you can get an idea of the perceived height. I'm a big guy on what is the perceived height of the building from the massing standpoint, not only dimensions and number of stories, but what are you feeling and what are the people across the street feeling? So that's why this exhibit is in here. We've had questions about what the street section is going to be, the 5-foot tree pit here, the 6-foot sidewalk, all that is still intact. Our building zone components. This happens to be one of the units that maybe has a more elevated stoop, but that's the purpose of this slide in here. And then just a vehicular circulation slide, which is consistent with the previous approval. And with that being the case, Jack, we'll take questions when we're done, but I'll hand this back over to you or Nick to just talk about where we are in the process, which you've already sort of lightly touched.
Exactly. Thanks, Jack. So yes. Go, Nick, maybe you go ahead. You're more.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to remaining process. And then sorry, my camera is not doing well here. And then I think Mr. Matuzik might have also wanted to share a little bit about an accompanying zoning ordinance amendment dealing with some topographical issues with height on the parcel. But We submitted the application back in February. We are in the midst of public engagement now. We do expect to have a community meeting that is staff-led, more formal county process like everybody experienced on CH3 and CH6 at some point this summer. And then we would be targeting public hearings by October. This is a minor amendment. It would potentially go to the consent agenda, though it might go to the regular agenda if folks are still interested in discussing it. So I think that's where we're at. Matt, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, just briefly, because it kind of gets lost in the presentation, and partly for good reason. It's a very minor issue, but one that I think we've been able to identify early on and beginning to understand this aspect of the overall proposal. And there are some significant grade changes on Fern Street as it meets 18th Street, really impacting this block and the one to the north, Crystal Towers. And it's leading us to a better understanding of how those grade changes begin to impact larger sites like this one, where we have this phased approach, but are still subject to this average grade calculation across the entire block, specifically one of this size. And what begins to happen is that the building you see on the screen closest to 18th, so the northwest corner of the property, while still generally delivering 3 stories, if you measure that in feet, it does begin to exceed the 35-foot height restriction that's codified in the Crystal City sector plan for that western edge of the district that we are on. So one of the things that we're going to be queuing up as we get ready for October is a very minor zoning ordinance amendment that addresses this issue and essentially allows further flexibility, primarily on the western edge of this block and the ones to the north, that would allow for, again, the continuation of the 35-foot height restriction, but also up to 3 stories in residential height, which has always been the intent there. But we feel that might be the cleanest way to ensure we are still keeping in the vision of what was anticipated, but not as explicitly where something as simple as a average grade calculation for a massive block begins to count against you, because that was never the intent. So in recognition that this and maybe future smaller phases on this on other blocks might happen, we feel that this minor zoning ordinance amendment could help clarify that.
Yeah, and I think the team spoke to it a bit during the presentation too, but getting that full 3 stories of residential height without the sort of punitive application of the ASC across the entire site really enables us to, deliver these family-sized units in an area that I think the sector plan and the community probably really appreciates having them. It just became a situation where we couldn't get to something that was really buildable and marketable and desirable if you applied ASC in ways that really did make sense. And then we also tried to give some exhibits that show the comparative height of these structures versus the single family homes across the street, or really what would be achievable for a single family home by right across the street. And the ultimate height of the structures, as experienced from the sidewalk, is extraordinarily similar, if not the same.
So we're happy to take questions, and I know that was a pretty robust presentation. So we're happy. Jack and I are happy to stay on as long as questions are out there.
Great, thank you. I see we've got a couple. Judy, do you want to lead off?
Yes, thanks. I think that I like many aspects of the proposal. I think that you're dealing with the grade changes from Fern in the open space is good. I am I think from the community standpoint, there's been a lot of pressure for purchase units, which basically have not been provided in previous projects. So I think that'll be very welcome. I was a little bit concerned about accessibility because it appears that there's a lot of stairs in all of these units, and it does mean that someone who has challenges or needs a wheelchair, I can't quite figure out whether or not they're precluded from these units. At least looking at the renderings, it didn't strike me. But overall, I think that I like the changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Jack, with regard to unit accessibility, there's two things, right? Getting from the street or the garage into your home, and then once you're in the home, given the size of these, I think we would not be able, and correct me, to offer elevators. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. When we get to do the other building, we hope that, that would be appealing to that particular home buyer. But at this point, there are no elevators, which then precludes it from being accessible from a fair housing or ANSI standpoint as measured under the building code.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Pam.
Hi, I'm Pam. I live on 19th Street, a few blocks from these buildings. I'm happy to hear that you're going to be having a public engagement sometime this summer. That will be helpful. And I'm generally happy with your plans. I think it's great that you're doing so many little townhouses on this space. I think the landscaping is great. The pedestrian paths are great. And I understand, if I'm understanding you correctly, all of the passages have some accessibility ways through them. That's even
Clearly two out of the three, right?
Right.
Probably not that little more private, sunken down park off of 18th Street.
Okay.
Well,
So,
the park itself will be accessible from the interior.
Right.
It's
Right.
just, you can't get from 18th down to it. So if somebody wanted to utilize the park, they could come in through the central
Right.
park and use a sidewalk system and move around the park.
And
But
what
those-
Jack just identified is truly sort of the main entrance from Fern to the site. That's where the public access easement will be for the mid-block connection that will run down to the central park. Go ahead, though. Pam.
Right. Yeah, I think you've done a nice job. Those of us who can use stairs will be able to enter from the 18th Street side, right? If we wanted to. Good.
Correct.
Yes, that's correct.
A couple other questions. I see all these street trees, and they look like they're actually in a landscaping zone. And there is no landscaping zone on Fern, and there's barely a landscaping zone on 18th right now. You are managing somehow to create sufficient space for all this, which is great. How do you do that?
Talk to the experts. We've got them here with us, but yeah, it's tough.
I'm very
Travis,
impressed.
is there any magic to that street section, including the landscape panel?
I don't think there's any real magic. We're just setting back the townhomes from the street with sufficient space for the sidewalk and the tree strip.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a huge improvement. I mean, there isn't there now. And of course, my final question, which there's stuff on that slide. Go back.
Oh, sorry, right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I have raised this before. I think the overall design is great. I just don't like the colors. I don't think they go with Crystal House. I don't think they go with the other houses in the neighborhood. If there's a way you can kind of mute them, especially the dark gray. And I'm specifically interested in a view of the side that we'll see on 18th Street, because a lot of pedestrians are going to be looking at that side.
Sure. So you're not the first person in a community that has said that. Again, our intent was to honor the original approval, and we were fine with we can be pretty bold in some of our cutting edge materials. We heard a couple of people in our last meeting at Roar Hills say something very similar.
I think Pam might have. It was Pam.
Yeah, it might have been Pam. Just 'cause I know she's in that
That's not
community.
fair. Hold on.
There's.
It doesn't matter if it's one person twice or two people once. It's still, we've gotten two comments.
But what we wanted to do was finish this initial community outreach and collect all the comments and then start, refining. So I think we heard you. We are good listeners. Hopefully you heard that last time. So we're open to it for sure. But again, we would love your support. We didn't want to upset the previous approval if we start making more changes. If we have community support, which maybe this is one component, that makes that process a little bit better.
Yeah, I think the design of the building is great. It's just the color.
Right.
And do
Okay.
you have a view of the side that faces 18th? I can't really see it.
I don't have any color. I mean, it's this here, but we can certainly make sure we do more of a rendering the next time we're in front of you.
Okay. That would be
Pam, I
great.
might be able to. I just reviewed a response to your letter, so we are sending something to you, and I will try to remember to tell Angelina as she gets back to maybe see if we could grab you something that shows you the colors there better. too, independent.
Yep.
Okay,
No problem.
thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's a great project. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We really appreciate that.
No wonder you stayed off camera.
You need to use a different voice, Pam. Hey, Jeff.
My excuse is my computer system.
There you go.
Hi, thanks. I'll echo Pam's sentiment that it's, I'm really happy to see this project. It looks good. It's a different housing form. Can you give me an idea of how many square feet the living spaces are, the ground, the living, the bedroom and the loft area is?
Yeah, it's the total unit from a habitable standpoint is a little under 2,100. It's about 2040, 2050 square feet.
Okay.
Somewhere in that world.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Emily.
Hi, everyone. He just asked my question. I was curious about the square footage, so thank you for answering that.
I'm sorry I didn't include that in the presentation.
No, that's okay. And another question I had, I like how you are adding more units with the back-to-back. I don't know if I've ever seen something like that before. How is the soundproofing?
Soundproofing is excellent. So first off, from an exterior standpoint, we will do, at the right time, we will do noise analysis and noise studies that will recommend what mitigations, both through windows or construction techniques, that we need to do to bring the interior noise levels down. The unit to unit, I have to tell you, in my 35 years of doing this work, I might have heard 2 complaints based on this construction type and assembly. And those complaints are because somebody put their speakers on the wall and they heard the thump, thump, thump. It has an STC rating of 55 and over. We do put bat insulation optionally in that assembly. It is a fire rated assembly getting you 2 hours, but it is really truly a tried and true tested assembly. So the sound is I would say excellent. And again, because you don't have any over under living footprints,
right.
None of that is kind of an issue. And the garage is a concrete top to the garage, so you wouldn't have any issues there.
No, that's great. And I didn't think of it until Pam brought it up, but I do appreciate her comment about the coloring, because just walking through Aurora Highlands with some of the tear down new builds, it's pretty jarring to see a black house.
Yeah.
So lightening the color in some way. And I'm just curious, from an architecture perspective, when the exterior of a house is so dark, does that actually impact the indoor temperature, or is it designed so well that it's not an impact at this point these days, I guess?
I would say the latter. Number one, the houses are very tight. Our HVAC systems are robust. And I think when you're dealing with, especially something like brick veneer, it has a mass to it that will just absorb and retain. And our roofs are a white rubber roof membrane, so that is reflective intentionally. And again, we do have these green building requirements that will address that. But and our windows are going to be low E windows as well too. So I think we're in pretty good shape there. It's a great question. I've never heard that question. That's a great question.
Yeah, I've just wondered, like, you walk by a black house and just think, ooh.
Yeah.
And then
again, just
brick,
to support
everyone. No, go ahead.
Just to add one more bit, this current brick actually is an iron spot specification, which means it has these little reflective particles in it. Not that that's going to make a big difference or not, but it's not like a matte black that would really absorb
I grew up in
heat,
New England in a dark brown house, and we didn't used to need air conditioning, but now we do. So it's just curious to me that people build black houses.
Yeah.
And then just to support the ADA point, I'm the person with the baby with the stroller, so I'm super aware of all this stuff now. So I appreciate that you guys are definitely paying attention to that in the design.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Emily. I had a question, and maybe I missed it. Folks, they park underneath, they park their bikes or scooters underneath as well. How do they get up into their unit? Does everybody have their own dedicated stair, or do you come out?
Okay. Yeah, let me go back to the, let's see, I need to go the other way. So this is the garage
How
level.
do they get into the garage? Is it it's behind somewhere, or is it
No,
underground?
Well, the entrance to the common, I'll call it the common garage, is here, and you drive all the way through. There's one garage underneath this entire building. Here, let me do this. Let me switch gears here. I was prepared for potentially needing this. So this is
So
our
is
garage
it connected to the Crystal House's existing garage, but they will get assigned?
No, I'm sorry, I'm
No,
confusing
okay.
you. So this is CH 8A and 8B, and this is one garage underneath those two. So you have one back-to-back building, the other back-to-back building connected by one garage. The entrance is over here. If I go back to the PowerPoint, that's this entrance here. So there's one garage underneath this whole structure, and then CH7 has its own garage, which is this one here. So you come in a common entrance, there'll be an overhead door here. And then what happens is you immediately pull into your own private spaces under your unit. The unit is above is this. And then I'll just skip one, and then it's this one. So there's a common drive aisle underneath, and then you turn and park in these two, and you immediately go in your door. This is your, call it the back door. It's not what visitors will use. This is your homeowner door, and you are now in a finished condition staircase that, whoops, I don't want to do that. That's not going to show up. That lands you up here. Okay, so you come in from your car, you go in this door, you're in your staircase. There's not another door. This is a finished condition. You're in your house as soon as you get in this door. And then the front door would be over here. Does that make any more sense?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I understand now. Cool. So they actually have kind of a garage, like if they want to put their bike in one of the spaces.
Yeah, the trash, and there's space up in here. It's very similar to what a rear loaded townhome looks and feels like. I mean, it's very similar to that. It's just kind of half the dimension.
If you have a family that, has one car, they've got an extra space for visitors or for storage or for bikes. And if it's a family that doesn't want a car at all, they could use the spaces for e-bikes and other sorts of things too. So it's a flexible thing.
And I will say this hyphen area, which doesn't have any homes above it, this is where that park is. This is where we propose to have additional storage in the bike storage for homeowners over here. So this is space we're going to try to utilize.
Cool.
I'm glad you think so.
Wow, that I really, I join everybody else and really like it. And yeah, and if on the colors, if you're able to reflect, I mean, look at, not that there's a uniform color on the neighborhood side, but it would be, perhaps there's something you could do to kind of reflect what the neighborhood looks like, as opposed to, especially on the Fern Street side.
Sure.
But looks great. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
This is Jeff again. I had another comment, and you kind of touched on it, which is I'm really impressed that you were able to get 2 parking spaces per unit. You doubled the number of units and you gave each of them 2 parking spaces. Are visitors going to be able to get in to utilize that? And is visitor parking going to be the on-street parking that I see in the current slide? Or do you anticipate the homeowner being able to get people into that underground space?
It's a great question. And the visitor spaces are those, and if we go to the site plan, there are those few spaces. We are really challenging our civil engineer to find more spaces within the site, not in the garage, for lay-by, for drop-offs, UPS. So you've got the 2 there. We've got 1 or 2 there. We are looking for opportunities to create more parking, particularly that those deliveries in the Uber and the UPS and Amazon. But as it relates to visitor spaces, we just have those 84 dedicated for those 42 units. So as Nick said, if you've got 1 car, well, then you've got a space for your mother-in-law when she visits. Otherwise,
And that's about as generous as it gets, especially this close to a metro station in the heart of, urbanized Arlington. But we feel like it should be pretty solid.
Yeah, you got a parking ratio of 2.0.
Doesn't happen much.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Any other questions from anyone? Okay, and you have you talked to the Aurora Hills Civic Association last week. Great.
Yep.
Good. Do you have any other engagements planned with local community or any other engagements?
I think the next touch point is going to be the public meeting.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, good. Well, thank you for presenting. It's I enjoying everybody and really appreciative of the effort that's gone into it, and it really looks like probably going to sell them out pretty fast.
Well, you've got a wonderful neighbor, a community, and we're excited to be coming up to be a part of it. So thank you for your time, your comments, and we'll see you at the next community meeting.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay. All right. That brings us to the end of our discussion. I didn't know if we had anybody who wanted public comment tonight. If you do, just pop your hand up. And otherwise, our next meeting will be September 23rd. That'll be our third meeting of the year. It'll be an in-person meeting, and we will we'll figure out where we're going to have that. Let's see, Matt. Anything else we need to bring up? Oh,
no. Again, we'll have some follow up on the CIP as we hear back from either DPR or the manager's office about where some of the changes are coming from. So I'll definitely follow up, and we are working on a few other items that hopefully can be queued up in time for the next meeting, whose location still has to be determined.
Great. Judy and Emily, I see you guys have your hands up. Do you have something?
No.
Okay.
I do. It's not a public comment. Matt, if I have a question about an intersection, can I ask you, or is there someone else I need to talk to?
Feel free to start with me. I can forward it to the relative folks in the county. That happens pretty regularly. And usually I think
specifically I just want to actually raise it to this group really quickly. I know it's not quite on topic, but Army Navy, where 395, the express lane comes off, and there's an extension of the barrier for the express lane exit. And unfortunately, I have to drive this almost every day. And so what I found is the people coming off the highway are trying to go left, and the people coming on Army Navy are trying to go right. And there's about this much space before the traffic light to switch lanes. So it's a disaster. And I don't know who to talk to about it, but I'm not sure why that barrier was extended. I'm sorry for diverting. I just don't know who to ask about this. It's strange.
Yeah, email me.
Do you know which intersection I mean?
I think I have one in mind, but what we typically do is I can make sure that that comment gets to the right folks who either are the lead, project managers for that particular, capital project, or can reach some inspectors and hopefully get back to you. So happy to start that conversation.
Is that one of the temporary barriers that they've put up?
It doesn't look temporary though. It's concrete.
Oh,
so they built it out, and
I thought it might be part
luckily
of
everyone's going pretty slow, but it's like everyone who comes off needs to go left, and everyone who's coming off Army Navy needs to go right. So it's really bizarre.
Okay. Yeah. Matt, if you're able to help follow up there. Okay. One last thing. We talked about coming up with a green ribbon group to start following up on some of the kind of potential gap areas. I'm sorry that's moving so slowly. I think we'll be able to start to convene that group soon. I've gotten a lot of input from folks on kind of the gaps that that such a group would address, and I'll reach out to you folks individually. I've gotten some feedback from a few folks already, and we'll get that group going. Okay. All right. With that, thank you very much for joining tonight, and wish you a good summer, and we'll meet up again in September. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye all.